Going on, everyone? Welcome to another Saturday over here at Level Effect. Got a special guest here today, Tom Marsland. Good afternoon. Well, good morning to you. Another West Coaster. Coffee's in hand. Good to have you with us, Tom.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Nice. And hello, everyone in chat. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. See, we got a decent sized crew kicking in already. Good to have everyone over here, back for another stream. Defensive scripting with PowerShell. Going to be broadcasting something new and exciting this time. How's everyone doing? And how are you, Tom?
I'm doing good. I'm excited to be here. I'm looking forward to helping out and teaching the course, and looking forward to interacting with everybody that's here in the chat today.
Cool. Good. Karina, going on. Patricia's over here as well, too. CI. JR as well, too. We got some more people rolling in. Awesome. I'll give you a proper intro here in a second over here, Tom, but good to finally have you on stream with us. I know we've been trying to plan this one for a little bit now and getting you more involved in the Level Effect community. It's always been great working with you over the past couple of years, so it's good to have you here, man.
Yeah, it's really a joy, and I really love what you guys are doing, so happy to help support and do what I can.
Awesome. Cool. Well, if anyone here hasn't met Thomas Marsland, but he goes by Tom, I'm pretty sure. I've never actually called you Thomas, so I'm pretty sure it's just Tom.
I go by Tom.
Yep, he is Tom. 24 years of experience in information technology and cybersecurity and nuclear power fields as well, too. Tom holds a top secret SCI eligible clearance. That's pretty cool. He's currently the Senior Director of Security Operations over at DigiCert. He was chairman of the board over at VetSec, so Veteran Security, that we've been working with closely over, 5 years, I think now, doing our live training, and we've been having veterans join us. So Tom's been leading the charge over there with the community, doing a lot of great for veterans getting into cybersecurity and helping them out. It's an awesome community. And also, he was the vice president of technology over at Cloud Range during this time as well, too. He's actually just started over at DigiCert. So a ton of experience, and 21 years prior to that in the Navy in a lot of technical positions, which I'll let Tom talk about a little bit more because it's going to start going to Navy jargon that I'm not too familiar with myself. But Tom, it's awesome to have you here with us more officially. Ton of experience.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm really excited to be here, and morning, afternoon, evening to everybody that's tuning in. I'm really here because I really love what Level Effect's doing, from when they started with the Cyber Defense Analyst live courses to the on-demand. I'm a big proponent of objective-based learning and competency-based learning, and aligning to, especially coming out of the military where everything was pretty structured.
Yeah.
Aligning to things like the NIST and ISE framework, where we can actually objectively tell somebody that's looking to get into this field what they need to know, and then build courseware around teaching that. And so when this opportunity came up with the SOC 100 course, I wanted to help where I could. When I was in the military, there were a couple of duty stations that I worked at where I had to use PowerShell in depth. And I think it's a great scripting language, and I've got some experience there, so I wanted to help pass on my knowledge and help out with this group. I did spend 22 years in the Navy, in the submarine field, all over the globe, from surfacing through the ice at the North Pole to all over the Western Pacific. All mainly in the nuclear power field, but then around all of the shore commands that I served at, I started getting into different IT roles. Help desk management, security operations, network and systems administration, and served as an IT director for one of the Navy schoolhouses while I was there. And then on my way out the door, I got involved with this, at the time, smaller community called VetSec. Really started as a Slack community to help veterans find roles, help them network as they were getting out of the military, and help them translate their military skills into real-world resume bullets. And then we started pursuing partnerships with different training providers that we recognized that we thought were really high quality. And that's actually how I met the team over at Level Effect. And we started talking about what we could do there, and they graciously offered a couple of veterans in different cohort seats for their courses. And it's been a great partnership ever since. Loved working with all of you. And then, in the private sector, I first came over to CloudRange, worked there as the VP of Technology, running their product, information security, and customer support teams. And then just recently, about 2 months ago, I joined the team at DigiCert, where we're focused on trust on the global internet. And I run their security operations team for their distributed denial of service product line and the services we provide around that.
Awesome.
So
good intro, man.
Excited to be here. Looks like we've got 23 people in the chat. So hey, if you're excited to be here, say something in the chat too, please.
Yeah, let's hear from everyone while you're all rolling in. Maybe with some of you with your morning coffees and such. But yeah, let's give a little shout out when you're all ready in chat. If you're excited, PowerShell is a big topic. A lot of people are intimidated by it. I mean, I was when I first started, truly. So good to have you walking us through it over here, Tom. And good insight in the background, man. You've definitely been everywhere. And I think cybersecurity by extension really kind of has a lot of military infusion, into it. There's a lot of the same types of principles and approach, defending and responding to threats, procedural, kind of like muscle memory. You need to be ready for things and such. So curious as well, too, as you go through kind of sharing maybe some similarities that you've seen between, like,
absolutely. I think military to cyber was a really natural fit for myself, because of just kind of the mission oriented mindset that you have in the military, and then in cybersecurity, like you're still defending something, and so I think that was a very natural crossover. We get a ton of people who join VetSec who want to go straight into cybersecurity. People who didn't work in any technology fields in the military, who are just passionate about what they could do there. And as far as PowerShell, it definitely starts a bit intimidating, but we'll break it down. We'll get into the basics here, and we'll make it digestible and learnable for everybody here today.
Absolutely. Cool. Good stuff. Well, we're now coming up to 28 in the chat, so we're going to start seeing more people start to roll in. We're going to get the screen shared over here in a second, and Tom's going to start going through the course. So we are going to be diving into the SOC 100-5 course object itself, and Tom has a whole module set aside. So what I need to do is go and unlock all that for everyone right now. Just give me 1 second to get that going.
In the meantime, while Anthony's doing that, if you have any questions about the course, questions for me, anything about what you'll learn, drop them in the chat. I want to keep this as interactive as possible, so as we go, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in there, and I will try and answer as we go along.
Absolutely. Nice. D Bagel, good to have you here with us. He's an old returning viewer, so he's joining the crew today. Awesome.
Nice. Welcome.
Yeah, go ahead and ask Tom questions. Seriously, he is super responsive, so I'm almost getting this set up and ready over here, but feel free. This isn't just like a show up and listen to a lecture. Wait 1 second.
Yeah, no, the more interactive, the better, for sure. And you can follow along on your home machine. If you have the VM inside of the course, then you can follow along with that too. And we're going to start right from the beginning. We're going to start with people who have never used PowerShell before. And kind of go into the basics, how the language is laid out, what you can do with it, and then we'll see how far we get through. But I've got some specific examples that would be useful for operations in the SOC, specific things that you might want to do around system administration, IT admin. So there'll be a lot of stuff we can go through. My chair. Actually, it's getting a little worn in now, but yeah, I've got the
secret lab?
The secret lab chair,
Nice. Cool. Okay, let's get you cut over here. Should be able to see the screen, and the module should now be unlocked as well too. There was a little quiz gate that was blocking everyone, but everyone should be able to see the screen now.
Alrighty.
Cool, Tom. Well, off to the races, man. It's all you at this point now. So I'm still here. I'm going to be moderating the chat, and I might chime in with a couple things as you're going as well too, Tom. But feel free to take us through it. Let's see PowerShell defensive scripting in action.
Awesome. All right, so let's get started. So first, who is this module really for? It really is for people who are just getting started with PowerShell. People who have never opened it up before don't really understand the difference between Windows PowerShell, PowerShell Core, and now just PowerShell. Anybody who's working in help desk, server administration, or in the SOC, interested in making their lives just a little bit easier, and interested in seeing from an architecture standpoint behind the scenes at Microsoft how PowerShell scripting language can really help them both in IT admin and in cybersecurity. Today we'll talk about the lab environment. You can do this all on your home PC. There are some commands, and I'll caution you through the course that you wouldn't want to run because you might turn off vital services, things like that. We'll talk through Visual Studio Code, which is my scripting editor of choice, and PowerShell as the language. The great thing about PowerShell that I want to start with is, with a lot of other languages, you're going to be encouraged or predispositioned to go to Google or to go to ChatGPT. With PowerShell, I'm going to really encourage you to start from the foundations of not doing that, of using the help commands that are built into PowerShell. You can learn so much about the language just within the help commands in PowerShell themselves. So let's go ahead and click over to the next tier, and I'll talk a little bit about the background of PowerShell. PowerShell started, if you don't know the name Jeffrey Snover, he's a principal legend behind the scenes there at Microsoft. He wrote a manifesto back in the late 2000s called the Monad Manifesto, talking about how we needed a language that would tap into all of the different Microsoft products and would provide a standard for interacting with every different product that Microsoft was putting out, from Microsoft Exchange Server to Active Directory to Word, PowerPoint, all the things, all the operating systems. And he was the one that originally came up with the idea and originally did the authoring of PowerShell. It's built on top of the .NET framework. It allows admins to manage systems more efficiently. So, kind of what is it used for? Well, you can run straight from the command line. You can also run as a scripting language, where you can automate through scripts in either a PowerShell interactive scripting editor or just writing these things out in Notepad. It's an object-oriented scripting language, so we'll get into what that means in a little bit, but PowerShell works with structured objects that have properties that you can call methods on, you can output in different formats, and you can pass them through a pipeline. So the first thing I want to do is show you how to get into PowerShell. So let's switch over to our lab machine. The directions in the course will both talk about if you're using the lab machine that's built in or if you're using your own PC. If you're using your own PC, you have commands down here to use winget to install PowerShell. If you're following the VM in the course, we're using Windows Server, and so you'll have to go out to Microsoft.com. So let's go ahead and do that first. I'll switch over here to the lab course and or the lab VM. And again, if you have any questions as we're going, if something's not making sense, please drop it in the Twitch chat and we'll jump on top of that. So if you just search PowerShell download, a couple of things to give you background on. So the original PowerShell that was developed by Jeffrey Snover and the team is now called Windows PowerShell. It is specifically made to interact with Windows and a lot of the pieces that can plug in there, Active Directory services, Exchange Mail, things like that. About 4 years ago now, they made a platform agnostic version of PowerShell that we now just call PowerShell. It's PowerShell 7 and up. And that is what we're going to download and install. You can install PowerShell on Mac OS. You can install it on Linux. and there are commands that you can run to interact with those as well. So we're going to go to installing the MSI package, which is listed as the best choice for Windows Server, which is what we're on today. And when we click there, we'll just download this top link and go ahead and run it. And as far as the installer, you can just go through the defaults here. And I purposely did not install this on the VM to begin with, just so I could show this process as well. You can accept the defaults and go through the install, and it'll run pretty quickly here. And then for the purposes of today's course, we're going to run PowerShell as an administrator so that we have access to all of the commands without having to escalate privileges today. So I'll just go ahead and click finish here. And then in the bar, we'll just type PowerShell. And you see, now we see Windows PowerShell coming up. We see Windows PowerShell Interactive Scripting Editor. And then we see the one we just installed, PowerShell 7. So we'll right click and run as an administrator here. Okay, so for those of us that are a little old school, it looks pretty similar to an old DOS command prompt. The only real difference is that you see this PS in front and you get the version. So with that, we have PowerShell now actually installed. Let me go back over to the course myself. And the first thing that we can play around with a little bit is to see what version of PowerShell we're running, and that's what I walk through in the course is kind of the first command you're going to run. And then we'll do a little bit of kind of a hello world, because that's where we always start with anything programming related. I'll break down what the commands look like in the next module as we go into the basics, but for now, if you have PowerShell up and running, if you just type $, which is to call a variable, and then PS version table and hit enter, you can see some things here about PowerShell. So you can see that we're backwards compatible all the way down to version 1. You can see if we're going to use PowerShell for remoting into other Windows machines or Mac or Linux machines. There's a remoting protocol version, and you can see kind of the most important piece is that we are running PowerShell 7.5.0. So if there are commands that aren't working, there are times where you'll want to go and check the version and see if you need to update your PowerShell version. And then finally, we're going to run one last command out of this module. We're going to call write host, and you can already kind of see it's filling in that it needs a string. It's a little hard to see in the background there, but it's kind of grayed out text. If I hit why am I not typing? Oh, there we go. Okay. So if I hit write host, and then I can put a quotation, and I can say, hello class. That'll be my hello world. And if I hit enter, you can see there we get a little write back out to the screen. So we've already run our first, what we call a commandlet in PowerShell. And in the next module, we're going to break down how object-oriented these are, how they lay out. While we're getting switched over to the next module, does anybody have any questions so far? Is everybody able to open PowerShell and get at least the command prompt or the shell prompt up and running?
Yeah, seems pretty straightforward, right? The first little bit over there. So interesting choice going ahead and installing PowerShell. I think it comes pretty much default with Windows, but there was a couple options that I saw in the installer as well. So what like, I guess, what are your thoughts on that, Tom? Like what benefits are there to using the installer versus sort of like the default PowerShell inside?
Well, so with Windows 10 and 11 right now, PowerShell, the core PowerShell that's running that's the platform agnostic version, doesn't come installed. So that was really the reason why I wanted to walk through that. There were some options in the installer, location, obviously, if you wanted to launch it, run, and then some options to make PowerShell the default for different commands. There really isn't a good reason, unless you're strictly a Windows or Microsoft shop, to be running Windows PowerShell anymore. The extensibility of PowerShell 7 is really just leaps and bounds above the kind of deprecated Windows version at this point. So really, that's the one that I work with mostly, and that's the reason I wanted to walk through the installation, was just so people could see that that is different from Windows PowerShell. And if you wanted to start working with that scripting language and the newer stuff that's come with it, then go ahead and install that from the site. And again, if you're running on Windows 10 or 11 or on Linux, that learn.microsoft.com link does give you the installation instructions there. You can also do an apt-get on Linux if you're running on a Debian box, or you can go and use win-get if you're on Windows 10 or 11, the client operating systems. So with every module, as you go through the SOC 105 here, I do have a practice exercise at the bottom and kind of a summary. So, you can find the version again. You can try that right host command and see that you've got PowerShell up and running correctly. And then really at the end here, PowerShell, as opposed to Windows PowerShell, again, is available across platform. You can use it in different environments, and we went through our first variable call, and we went through our first command-let, is what they're called in PowerShell. And here in PowerShell Basics, the next little module will break those down a little bit more. And this is where we're going to get into some fun. So this is where we're going to get to play with the language and see how to get help and how to explore. And as you start coming up in PowerShell, I think the most important thing is that you do take time. Don't just go through the course, beginning to end, trying every command, but go ahead and actually explore this a little bit. So, kind of what does that mean? Well, if I come back over here to PowerShell and to my window, every command that you see laid out like this, right-host, they all follow that same format. It's a verb-noun naming convention. So what does that mean? It means if I want to find processes running on my machine and display those, I'm going to start with the get verb. And in this case, I can type get process, and I can get a list of running processes on my computer right now, or on this VM. And you can see I've got Microsoft Edge, Amazon SSM agent. I can learn a little bit more, and I can see things like what memory, what CPU, what the process ID is. When we talk about PowerShell being an object-oriented scripting language, this is kind of what we mean. Every process is treated as its own individual object that has properties. It has a process name, it has an ID, it has a CPU property. And if we want to learn more about those processes, then we can dive in and pull the specific methods or properties of that process out. And I'll show that here in just a minute. Some other things that we can play with, if we want to see, well, okay, I don't even know what command to run to do something. Well, we can start with get command. And this is going to be a very long list, especially a little longer because I'm sitting here on a Windows Server box. But if I scroll through this, I can see every commandlet that I can run. And you see they all follow this verb-noun kind of format. So like new item, join string, measure command, measure object. And some of these will be mapped to existing Windows commands that you're familiar with. Some of these will be mapped to commands that you were used to running in Linux that you're familiar with. They brought a lot of that over and made this kind of cross-platform agnostic. So, well, this is a huge list, and I don't really know what these do. I can just read the name, and I can see some of the properties like a version number here. So how do I figure out what I would actually want to run? I always try and think of a real-world problem that I might want to solve with PowerShell. There we go. And so the first thing I'm going to do is, well, maybe I want to know about the services that are running on the computer. So what can I find that's about the services? Well, let's go back to that get command function. And we're going to use wildcards around the word service. And now I can see that here's every commandlet that I have. And you can see there are different command types. There are functions, which are really around some of the extra modules that you can install on top of PowerShell. So these are related to network security and server manager. Those came with Windows Server for this machine. But here down in the PowerShell functions, I can see that I have specific commands. I can get services, I can create a new, I can remove, restart, resume, set, start, stop. So this helps me kind of dive in a little bit on what I might want to do and how to find commandlets that'll do that. So now let's see, well, how do I know what this does? So PowerShell, these are the two most important commandlets you'll learn in PowerShell. The first was get command, right? The second one is get help. So if I run get help, I can then type the name of a commandlet afterwards. So let's say get service. We want to know what get service does. We'll go ahead and run that. And now we can see syntax. There are 3 different kind of syntaxes that this commandlet runs. The first is that if you specify a name, then here are the additional options. The second is if you use display name or dependent services. You see there's an alias here, GSV, and we'll talk about aliases. And then you see, well, I can't find help files for this commandlet, and if I want to download and install them, I can use a commandlet called update help. So let's explore a little bit. Let's be curious about the language that we're in. If I run get help and then update help, what does that actually do? Well, it tells me there's a syntax if I want to update a specific module, different parameters around credentials, etc. No alias, and same thing, I can't find the help files, and this is because we just installed PowerShell. So we'll go ahead and run update help, and it'll take just a moment. And while that's running, let's go take a look at the chat here. So Saray, you say syntax can be tricky at times. It does want you to be specific, just like any kind of command line. Different commands. If I go back to Linux, I had a lot of strife working with some students in the past because of the case sensitivity of Linux, right? Things like that. In this case, PowerShell does support tab completion, which can be really nice. And going back to those 2 kind of core modules, get command and get help, are really going to serve you well here. I encourage everyone, be curious about the language that you're learning and use the built-in commands to explore it and see things that you might want to do. And we'll keep going through. So I did get one little error here that it can't find one help file for a module that was installed around Windows Defender. This probably won't pop up if you're running a Windows client, but here in the Windows Server VM, it just doesn't have help on that. You can also install help for different languages, and it kind of talks about that here at the end, using the UI culture parameter. So now that we've installed the help files, let's go ahead and go back to where we were. We were looking at services. So we'll go get help, get service. And now I can see a little bit more. I can see what it actually does. It just gets the services running on the computer. Here's the commandlets. This one's only available on Windows. Gets objects that represent running services. And you can direct it to get only specific services by specifying. So we're seeing a couple of things here where we're chaining commands together. We're using the second commandlet as the parameter for the first. If we want to get a lot more information, we can use this detailed switch. So let's go ahead and try that out. And now we get, here's what some output would look like. Here's how we could, here's an example where we could sort the services that are running by a property. So in this case, they were sorting them by status. Tons more information, right, about the command. It tells you what every parameter does. So display name, again, that same description, some different syntax. And if you want to browse that online, you can also use the get help get service -online command. I do like to show that one as well, just so you can see what that does. It's going to pop up a browser that'll go out here to Microsoft's help site specifically. And you can see here's the syntax. You can copy right out of these. Here's that same description. Here's examples, right? If I want to get all services on the computer, okay, great. I can just run that commandlet. If I want to search for specific strings, I can do that. And then here's a very interesting thing that I want to point out. So this pipe command, this is where I'm going to take get service and run it. And that will get all the services that are running on the computer, as we saw up here in example number 1. And then it will actually use those services, which are objects that are being pulled by that commandlet, and it will pipe them into the where object command. And then they applied some logic to look for the running commands. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like really quick. And then we'll go ahead and move on. So I don't know why this is that paste thing again. Let's see. Okay.
Yeah, it's a little finicky when you're dealing with the guacamole sessions. Yeah, copy from there.
Yep.
Then it should go. Yeah. There you go.
All good.
Nice.
Oh. There we go. We'll go ahead and scroll back up. So you can see here now in the status bar, it only pulls the things that are running. So let's break this down a little bit. So we ran get service as a commandlet, which pulled every running service on the computer. Then we took all those objects, all of them, and we passed them into the where object commandlet. And the where object commandlet allows you to pass different parameters to filter. And so anytime you see this in brackets, this $, underscore, and a dot, that is referring to the object that is being passed in. So it's almost running a loop behind the scenes, looking at every object that was passed in by get service and looking at the status of those where they are equal to running. And then it's displaying that. So yeah, great. Thanks for throwing that in the chat there. Yeah, is everything making sense so far? Are there any questions about anything we've done? While we're waiting for that answer, and if things are great, you know, throw a W or a thumbs up or something in the chat just so we know that we're moving along okay so far. I'm gonna go back and just start doing a little bit more searching around get command. So if we're looking at, you know, what we can do with processes running on a computer, we could do the same thing. And this is going to come to kind of my first little pop quiz for everyone. So I'm going to type a command and I'd like people to tell me what they think it would do in the chat. If I run get service piped to stop service, what do we think that's going to do? Please, if you're doing this on your home computer, don't run that command. You probably won't be with us on Twitch.
That's a good clarification there. Yeah.
No, it's not going to error. Well, it will eventually, I guess. It'll take a while if you're running PowerShell as an administrator. Yeah, absolutely, Saray. So it will get a list of all services running on the machine, and then it will try to stop every service running on the machine all the way through. And if we just run get service by itself, yeah, we did run that list of what was running, so that's probably a better way to go back up. Well, we ran it for services. So, you know, everything from sysmain to your themes, user manager, Windows time, right? It's going to try and stop every single one of those services that are running. Your DNS client. It probably won't kill your browser because that's not running as a service. That'll be running as a process. But if we did the same thing, you know, get process piped to stop process, it's going to try and get all those running processes on the computer, which there you'll see everything from, you know, Microsoft Edge, Explorer, everything else that it'll try and kill. Great. So how would we know that, right? If we're just being curious about the language, how would we know that? Well, we could get help on get process, and I won't do the full detailed. So that gets the processes on a local computer. And again, the pipe command, as long as the second commandlet will accept those objects as an input, like you're not gonna be able to pipe something to get process, right? Because it's actually pulling objects. It's not something that'll receive them. But as long as that second commandlet will accept those, then you could do that with anything. This is a universal about the scripting language. So now stop process, right, says, hey, you can specify processes. You can pass an object, which is what we would have been trying to do. And then to stop a process that's not owned by the current user, you have to use administrator. And you are not prompted for confirmation unless you specify that confirm parameter. The other thing I want to talk about really quickly, that's just a little bit about the language in full, and then we'll keep moving through the course, is the what if parameter. So let's see if I can find that here in the help. Here you go. So what if? This is a fantastic parameter. It's there on all the core commandlets. This will tell you what would happen if the commandlet runs, but it doesn't actually run the commandlet. So if you're chaining together new things to try and make an automation or anything like that, but you're not really 100% sure what it's going to do, you can always append -what if to the end of that commandlet, and that'll tell you what would happen. So let's see if we can do this here. I'm going to run get process, and I'm going to actually pipe it to stop process, but I'm going to add what if. Okay, so this is what it would try and do. It would try and perform the operation stop process again on every process that was running on the computer. But you see, I'm safe. I didn't break anything. We're still here on the stream today. All good. So that's a powerful tool to look and see what you could be doing, right? Because if I did run that, this VM would probably be needing a reset. Okay, let's see where we were at here in the course. So we discussed through understanding commandlets, again, that verb noun naming convention. And you can already see, if I was working like at a help desk, system administrator, and I'm trying to get information about a running machine, either a machine that I'm on as an administrator or one that I could remote desktop session if I was a sysadmin, how some of these would be useful. We haven't really gotten into how to really pull information out of the data we're getting to yet, but we can find running processes on a machine. We can find running services. If I found a service that should be running, I'm helping troubleshoot why something won't print and I need to start or check and see if the print spooler's running, I could get service and see if that is there, and if not, I could hit start service and pass that in. So already seeing some usefulness in the language. Again, I'll reiterate, hey, always use get help, always use get command. That's your get command is your Google inside of PowerShell. It's how you find commandlets that you can run. And then getting help with the commandlet that you're interested in is how you figure out how to run it, what it takes. You can always add -detailed. We walked through updating help. Great next step. Let's talk a little bit about the objects around these commands. So, if I go to get service again, I see a status on the left column here. I see a name and I see a display name, which gives you a little bit more information. But is that really all there is to get service? Well, let's say we want to find out if there are any other objects that just aren't being displayed, or what can we do with this commandlet? What is it going to give us? You can take any commandlet and pipe it to get member, and get member will tell you all of the different objects associated with that commandlet. So get service has way more than just a status, a name, and a display name. It has some methods that you can run on it. So I could call a specific service with .close at the end, and I could close it. I could pause, refresh, start, stop. If we go down into the properties themselves, it has a binary path name. It'll have some booleans, so that's kind of a true or false, a 0 or 1. Whether that service can be stopped or can be shut down or can be paused and continued. Properties, whether it's a delayed start, we already saw what that display name was, etc. Right? So there's a lot more that you can interact with here. All right. Last part of this module is we're going to talk a little bit about aliases. So what are some popular commands that you're used to running from a command prompt that you're wondering if will still work in PowerShell? Just throw them in the chat.
Yeah, let's get some commands going out there, and then we can jump to the alias topic. Probably one of the nicer features about PowerShell, I have to say.
Yeah, and you can do, okay, so get child item. So get child item is a commandlet itself. And that is what get child item does. Does anybody know any just traditional like Linux or Windows commands that you used to run that would do the same thing? Yeah, there we go. So RPG ash, right? dir. Yep, looks like that does the exact same thing. In Linux, the ls command, hey, look at that. It also did the exact same thing. So this is where we get into aliases. Yeah, xenophils, basic ls, absolutely. So how would we have known what get child item does? Anybody throw a syntax for a commandlet I could run to figure out what get child item would have done?
What do you all think?
Get alias will get a list of aliases running on the computer. That is absolutely true, and we're going to play with that here in just a minute. But if I want to figure out what a commandlet does inside of PowerShell without going out to Google or anything else, how would I figure out what the get child item commandlet does? This goes back to what I think are the two most important commandlets here in PowerShell. I'm going to slowly start typing it. Use the help, absolutely. So we're going to run get help, get child item. Jordan, way to go. Perfect syntax there.
Nice.
So there we go. So get child item commandlet gets the items in one or more locations. If it's a container, it gets all of them. And you can use the recurse parameter to get items in all child containers and use the depth to limit how deep it goes. So this is going to be similar to your find, potentially, with the parameters that you can use here in Linux. But this is also very similar to, like we said, ls, dir. It's just a little bit more powerful than all of those. And to give you just a little bit more background on PowerShell before we dive in on aliases here, the vision for PowerShell is that any Microsoft service product, so not like an application like Notepad, but any service product, anything that you can do in the GUI, you should be able to do via commandlet. That's their goal. So if it's, turning on a service in the control panel, there's a commandlet for that. If it's configuring a new user in Active Directory, there's a list of commandlets for that. So anything that you would want to do from an administrative perspective in any of the Microsoft products, you should be able to do now with PowerShell. And each team, so like the Microsoft Exchange Server team, has a group of people that work on PowerShell, and the PowerShell, like when you click the button in the GUI, it's actually calling the commandlets behind the scenes. That's all it's doing nowadays. And that was kind of a mandate that every Microsoft server-related product is now PowerShell driven and supported. Okay, so going back to what EDU Morier wrote here, get alias. That is where we're going to play next. So if I run get alias here, I can kind of see, one, all of the aliases have the property or the command type of alias. But I can see, my typical things like CD is now set location in PowerShell. That used to be like change directory, right? Clear screen, CLS is clear host. So we can see all of these that map. If we're getting into loops, which we'll talk about a little later, for each object, you can just type for each. If you get into actually writing scripts where you're going to write something in Notepad and save it, and it's going to be something that you run routinely, I highly recommend going and writing out the commandlets instead of aliases, because it's very easy to forget a month from now that you wrote FT, and that means format table. So I will encourage everyone, stick to the base until you're very comfortable. When you're just at the command line, yeah, it makes sense, GCM for get command, but it can get very confusing very fast. And you're going to see lots of stuff in here. Get location was the old PWD, print working directory. RM is remove item. And I think we have a DEL up here too. Yep, DEL is also remove item, right? So this is another place to explore, and you can kind of see, oh, these are my traditional commands that I was used to, and here's the translation now. But they did try to make this as kind of backwards compatible for all of us older folks as possible. You can also create your own. So if I want, maybe I'm sick of typing get process but I run it all the time. Yeah, Jordan, great question. So that's actually where I'm going right now. Personal aliases can be created. You can't change the built-in system aliases, but you can create your own. So if I wanted, let's say get process, I'm just tired of typing that, and I want an alias for it. I'll type, get pro instead. I can just type this. Set alias, the name of the alias, and then what it's going to map to. And I get no error. So now if I type get pro, there it is. Same thing. I'm getting all the processes with that. I also much prefer the verb noun commandlets as well, just because they tell you what they're doing when you run them, right? GCM, like I still don't have memory that will get commands. I prefer get command. Okay, so now let's play a little bit with that filtering. We did this just a little bit more earlier, but if I type, actually let's get the help on where object before we dive into that commandlet. So this is going to be a great sorting tool. We're going to see, so the where object commandlet selects objects that have particular property values. So you can use it to select files that were created at a certain date, events with an ID, computers on a particular version of Windows. All examples of I can pass, because it's just a commandlet that deals with objects across the board. I can pass any object from almost any command to it, and then I can use it to filter. And it really filters off of those properties or off of values. So you can use it to find things. You can use it to sort. And there's also a great commandlet called sort object too. And I'll get help on that so we can see that. So this sorts in ascending or descending order based on property values. So let's play around just a little bit more. So if I wanted to see all the properties associated with get process, first we'll run it, and we see, okay, there's 6, 7 properties displayed: name, memory, CPU. If we want to see if there's any others, we can go, get process to get member. Well, maybe I want to sort them by their start time, which isn't even shown to me. So let's play around with that. So that's called start time. So we're going to get process, and we're going to sort on something that we couldn't even see originally. So we'll sort object by start time, and we can go descending. So you can see they're definitely not in any kind of alphabetical order by name now. We have the Amazon SSM engine down here. You can see that I'm still not even showing that start time, but I can see that I am in a different sort. And this could be something that you could use when you're looking to see, what's the oldest running process on my machine, or if in more particular cases, I would want to sort off of like, what's my memory hog? Is it my Chrome browser still that I need to go back and close? And in this case, memory is laid out as WS in the properties list. And now I can see if I rerun that same command, it looks like PowerShell is the thing that is consuming the most amount of memory on my machine, followed by Microsoft Edge. Big surprise, right? Okay, so we're kind of through the PowerShell basics. We've talked about get command, get help, get member. We've talked about how to find things using where object, and I'll show one more example of that. I have Notepad running, right? I'm going to go ahead and close that out completely. And let's go and see if we can find Notepad. So I would use where object in this case. And some of the tricky things, and this is kind of a .NET framework thing, is when you're referring to an object that you're going to pass in, that's where you go to that bracket, $, underscore, and then the parameter. So in this case, I want to look for the name. I know that the name of the process is just referred to as name. But if you didn't know, you could use get process out to get member, and then look at the properties that it has, and one of those would be name. And in this case, we're going to search for Notepad. And I don't see anything. So now let's go ahead and start Notepad. There we go. And we're going to hit the up arrow and run that again. And now we see I do have a process of Notepad, and I have filtered through that entire process list and found that singular running process on my machine. Now, what could we do with that? Well, the great thing about these is I can add another pipe. So I got all the running processes on the computer. This is why I love PowerShell, by the way, as an aside. I can like flowchart these commands in my head, right? It makes logical sense to me as to how we're running things. So here, I'm getting all the processes on the computer. I'm searching through them all. And this, again, is running a loop behind the scenes where I'm looking at the object property of name. And I'm finding where that name equals Notepad. And then I'm going to pipe that into, what if I wanted to stop the process now? Be careful, you do need hyphens, not underscores. That can trick you up sometimes. Before I actually run that, I did notice that we also have on this VM Notepad++. If I run Notepad++ here, I'll just go ahead and minimize that. If I just leave this name at note, let's see if we find two things. Oh, that's why. I need to use some wildcards here. Didn't find anything because PowerShell was looking specifically for that. Let's see if I can find this. Nope. You must provide a value expression. Alright, well, we'll just go ahead and go along with our original example here. So, Notepad. So there's my Notepad process. And now let's take that we found and let's stop it. And as you can see, kind of behind the scene, behind that window, it disappeared. So again, from a system admin perspective, or from a, I'm looking for, the memory hogs on this machine, or I'm wanting to start to do some forensics, which would be applicable, then you'll start to want to dive into how I can chain these things together. I'm going to start with a big funnel of getting all these objects. I'm going to filter them down, and then I'm going to take some action on them. Let's see, Nuclear Guy says, like. Let me try that out. Let's see where we're at. So I'll like with wildcards. I think I still need the quotes. There we go. Awesome. So now if I run Notepad again, I've got Notepad here. I'll kind of pull that over to the side.
Yeah, it looks like it also found Notepad++ too in the back as well. So it should get both.
And there's my Notepad++. So now that I've got Notepad running, there we go. We've got both. Great job, chat. So now what if I wanted to kill both of those? I'm an administrator. I should see both of those disappear when I run stop process here. So both my windows up, Notepad on the left over here, Notepad++ here on the right. And if I hit enter, boom, both gone. All right, so for this practice exercise at the end of this module, just some things that we walked through, which we've already done here. How would we find a list of available commandlets? How would we get help about one? How could we retrieve a list of running processes? And then how could we find, things like services that are running, or start sorting things out? And then we talked about aliases. So again, commandlets always follow that verb noun. If you're trying to find a command because you're not sure what command to run to do something, that's where we go back to get command. and then your wildcard. So if I want to see, again, all of the processes around, let's see, I'm on Windows Server, so I might have some around users, right? There's all the commands that I could run that would deal with users. And in fact, we've got some great ones here. You know, let's say I wanted to see if there were any local user accounts that were administrators, and I wanted to go through and disable those because I'm responding to an incident on that machine. Or I wanted to remove users that had certain properties, like they'd been, you know, not logged into in a certain amount of time. This is where you can start filtering these commandlets, get all the objects, like all of the local users, and then use where object to do some filtering on them and get actual detailed useful lists of this. All right, let's go ahead and talk about how we can work with files and directories. So I'm gonna be in the lab working with files and directories here. So we talked about aliases a little bit. We talked about, I'll go ahead and clear my screen if I can type today. There we go. So working with the file system, you're going to need to be able to find things on machines, searching different user folders for malware, all sorts of things that can be applicable here in a security operations center. First thing, you know, how do we find out where we're at? Obviously, the command prompt does tell us I'm in the users administrator folder, but I can also run PWD for print working directory, or better yet, I can run get location, and that tells us where we're at. If I want to change directory, you know, going back to Linux and Windows, we'll probably run that cd command. And now I'm at my root level, my C prompt. But in PowerShell, that would be set location. So we're getting location, now we're setting it. So I'll go to, you know, C/users. All right, pretty straightforward so far. Now if I want to list files in a directory, like we said, we've got dir, we've got ls, we've got, what is the Windows prompt? Or sorry, what is the PowerShell command? You know, if I look at get alias and I know that those were my old ones, I can always filter back up. And I see ls is get child item. We played with that a little bit already. But what can I do with that? Well, let's go ahead and get some help on it. And I'm going to use the switch to give me some examples. This will just pull, instead of running the detailed switch, which will give me everything about it, this will just show some use cases and how they ran it. So if we're on, you know, we'll just scroll back up here to the top. So example 1, just getting the items from a file system, so I can specify a path, shows me running that. And it'll tell you what these mode properties are over here on the left. If I want to get child items in a directory, now I'm asking for just a list of those items. If I want to recurse down into subdirectories, so this is a great one to look at. Let's say I wanted to look at, you know, my current path, but I want to dive down and find all the text files. So let's see here. Get child item. And we can do this a couple of different ways. We can do -filter, which is actually the prompt that it's looking for. And let's say I want to see for text files that are anywhere below C/users. There might not be any. What did I miss? Let's scroll back up here. And then we'll show one other really neat thing. We'll kind of jump ahead just a little bit and show how you can use PowerShell here to interact with more than just a file system. Because a lot of these are applicable in things like the registry as well. Okay. We'll go ahead and go up a directory to the root. And we're going to try just getting everything down from here that could be a text file. And we'll let that run for just a second. While we're doing that, any questions so far in the chat? Everybody able to follow along, see where they're at?
Give a moment over there, yeah. Shoot some questions over. I do appreciate with PowerShell being so verbose, right? Like it's pretty much like you were just like reading English, right? For the most part.
Yeah.
A couple questions in there for you. There you go.
Very useful on that front. I'm going to go ahead and actually kill this right now because we are pretty much at the end of it, still searching for answers here. So we could see, by directory as it went down the list, every text file that was found. And I do have a question up here for Shadow Hunter. Let's go ahead and play with it. So, would using the commandlet get process, sort object, start time to sending help when trying to detect on malware on a system, and what additional commands would improve the analysis? So, it could. Think about the use cases. So what are we doing here? We're running get process. That gives me everything on a computer that's running process-wise. So that'll leave off services. And then we're going to sort those objects by start time descending. So that tells me what is the most recent process that was started on the machine and moving downward, right? That's a fantastic example of something you might want to go find out. And if you look at the process members, you can also start to look at what are some other things that I can find about that process, right? So if I want to see, what its memory usage is, or like you said, how long it's been running, how many threads it's taking up. Some very simple malware won't be multi-threaded, so you can look at things like that. You can look at how much size it's taking up in virtual memory. All ways that you could sort. And yeah, that last comment. I agree. I would prefer to stick to PowerShell when I'm trying to find things. I, in particular, have some strife with some of the Microsoft products like Outlook where I can see a notification that I got an email, but then I can never seem to find it, things like that. PowerShell, for at least the file system, can make your life a bit easier. I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit because I want to show you all something while we're in working with files here, and that's the registry. So if I want to see what drives I have on the computer, like I have my C drive here, I'll just highlight this a little bit here. So these are all different providers or drives that are installed on the computer, and we can see a couple of things here that are useful for all of you in that blue teaming side of the house, your registries, right? We have our file systems, we have our C drive, we have certs if we're dealing with signed certificates that we've installed, and we have the environment variables as well. And these are all treated as drives. So if I want to look at, say, my HKLM, my HK local machine, I can simply, remember, change directory is CD, or I can use set location. And I can say, well, I want to look at HKLM, my registry. And now I can look into my registry. Let's say I want to look into my system side of the registry. I can browse this just like a file system. So imagine the things you can do when you're trying to search for registry keys using the same commandlets in PowerShell that you were using on the file system. So just a little tease there, but you can specifically get items. So if I want to get the item, let's say in my local, I have software, Microsoft Windows current version. So here is that one registry key, and we could browse through the registry editor, right? This is where we talk about things like everything that's a Microsoft administrative tool. So where were we? We were in HKLM software, Microsoft Windows current version. And if I look at that and I compare that over here, make sure I'm in the same one. Yeah, so here we see our program files, dir, common files directory, sorted a little bit differently, right? But you can pull registry key items out and edit those the same way. So that's just one other place that you're going to be able to use PowerShell, not just in your file system, but across, you know, creating new registry keys, editing them, all sorts of great stuff there too as well. All right, so it seems like everyone's able to follow along so far, so let's keep moving. You know, similar things again to basic command line functionality. You know, if I go back to my get aliases, I can see that we have, you know, move or MV translate to move item. So if I'm wanting to just move something from place to place, MD goes to MKDIR, right? And there are ways to run new item to create like directories, CP for copy item, right? Things like that. Renaming, deleting, all sorts. They all generally follow along the item. And so instead of like remove file, which would be specifically towards a file, right? We're going to see a lot of things around items. So if I get command and search for the noun item, which is more universal, I can use get item to look at a registry key, right? I can use get item to look at a file. Same with new items. I can create things like that. Let's say I had a file. I'll just create one really quick here using Notepad. And I'm going to run as an admin so I can make sure I can save it where I want. Let's just say this class is awesome. And we're just going to go ahead and save that out. And we'll put it... we'll put it right here in C. We'll go ahead and let's create a new folder while we're at it. We'll call it test. And we'll go example. All right, so we have a file. Should be in test. We can validate that through the folder structure. You know, your old way here of pointing, clicking, and numerous ways to get down to the file. So there it is. It's in C test. So let's go back over to PowerShell. And let's say I wanted to read that. You know, in Linux, there was a pretty cool command that I used a lot called cat. And it looks like that is going to try and run get content here. This is a prompt you'll see anytime you run a commandlet without an input parameter that it requires. And so in this case, get content requires that I have a path. So I can close back out. There we go. And we'll go into, you know, the test directory. And if we run get child item, there's my example.txt. I could just run cat if you're comfortable, you know, at the Linux command line with that. I can see this class is awesome. So what does that look like in PowerShell? It's get content. And here I can run, you know, get content example.txt, and I see the exact same answers as well. I can also append anything to a file as well. So if I want to add to a file, I could do example.txt and then value level effect rocks. And now what happens if I'll just run cat. Now I see that appended to the file. We can also set content as well, and that's going to overwrite. So things there, right? You get the common thread of content. And you can add, clear, get, set, right? All sorts of things you can play with there. So again, thinking about how I'm going to use, you know, get command and my get help function. So let's say I didn't know what add content does. Well, again, I can dive in. It appends content. You can pass it in from the pipeline or using the value parameter. So from the pipeline, so I could be getting the content of a different file, passing it to add content to this file, right? So think about like log aggregation. I'm getting content from a bunch of different places, then I'm going to aggregate it. I could use a loop that has a variable with my one destination and a list of places I want to get my content from. You could really start looking at like scripting out your own kind of sysmon server on a scheduled task, things like that. And then if you want to create new files, it points you over to the new item file as well. One other thing here, you see down in the relateds, I see these about files. If I want to learn a little bit more about how things work behind the scenes, you can look at those about files. And there's a bunch of them. They explain a little bit more about the architecture of PowerShell. So specifically the about aliases is a whole article here about aliases as well. Jordan asks, is there a text editor like Nano or Vim on PowerShell? No, not built in straight to the command line. If you look down here, though, I have what's called the Windows PowerShell ISE. That was an interactive scripting editor built for Windows PowerShell itself. For today, for PowerShell 7 and on, most people are going to use Notepad or their scripting editor of choice. I'm a Visual Studio Code person, and they have a PowerShell module that will validate any of the scripting that you're going to run. And we'll play with that here a little bit later. Okay, let's see. Practice exercise for this section. We really already kind of did run through the examples, but you should be able to navigate around the file system, create files, write into them, read them, copy, rename, delete, kind of those basics. Same thing, right? There is a, if we talk about like in Linux, like you don't want to run RM with a recursive force, right? Especially from your root, because you're going to try and delete your whole file system. We do have a similar item here. We have remove item, which is your delete command. And then you could do, path C, and if you did like recurse force, that's going to try and delete your whole file system as well. So don't use that unless you're playing around on a VM, which can be a lot of fun. So we've done a lot of just kind of command line stuff at this point. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about how variables work. So if we remember back in the very beginning here, we did PS version table, right, to see what version of PowerShell we were running on. At the time, we didn't get into it, but really we're calling a global variable that's set across PowerShell that has these different values. Excuse me, let me grab a drink really quick here. All right, so we can use our own variables here as well. Let's say we want, just at the command line, we want a greeting. We'll just go back to my, hello class. So now I've set a variable, and if I call it, I can see what it says. If I want to write it out, instead of typing that text that we did before, I can now just specify that variable. Okay, pretty straightforward. We're going to get into kind of the basic building blocks now as we start working towards scripting. If I want to change it, I can just overwrite it. I could say, hello. And now if I go back to write host greeting, there we go. I can say hi to my friends here in the chat with it. If I want to know what type of variable, if anybody's using any other scripting languages, Python or any programming languages, C++, anything along those lines, right? Variables have to have different type set. So if I want to know what type of variable this is that I've created, I can call a property of the variable. So in this case, we'll go greeting get type. And I can see that that is a string. That's what we've created. And let's say I say, math equals 100. I can do the same thing here, math dot get type. That's an int 32. So PowerShell will automatically look at the input you're giving to a variable and assign a type. You can enforce a type if you want as well. And that's laid out in the course here as well. If I come over to my variables and data types, where'd I go? Right, I can enforce that. So if I say, yep, I definitely want this to be a string, the city of New York, I can do that. If I say, hey, is somebody an admin, I can assign that to a Boolean type. Here's some common data types. We do have arrays supported in PowerShell. We have hash tables as well, which is where you'll get into specific properties, more object-oriented. We can play with arrays, right? This is how we would call out an array, and then we can refer to those elements. So we might have a long array, say of usernames, and we want to know, what's the end of it. We can always use a -1 to access the very end of it as well. We can append arrays, and we can start looping through them. So let's play with that a little bit. So if I take this array of fruits here and paste, okay, so I have 3 fruits specified in an array, and I can look at those as well. There they are, apple, banana, and cherries. And now if I want to play with a loop, all right, so for those in the chat who are a little bit new to loops, probably not many of you. Seems like you're picking all of this up really fast. What we're telling the prompt here to do is we're passing in the entire array of fruits, and that is what is showing right here, highlighted, the second part. And we're saying for every single variable, and we called them fruit because that just makes kind of logical sense, but you could say for each, ABC in fruits, and it would do the same thing. You just have to remember that that's the variable you assign. And then in brackets, we're telling it to write out to the screen, I like, and then that variable. So again, I could go through and change this and say, ABC here. And if I came back up one more line, I could do the same thing there. We get the same response. So it's just how you refer to it. And a lot of these commands that you're seeing with the multiple lines, this is where we're going to start working in Visual Studio Code, where we're actually looking to write out scripts and things like that. Let's see. So we've talked about arrays. We've talked about kind of looping through them. Hash tables, very similar. That is where you can have a variable like a person, and you could assign properties to that. A name, an age, a location, things like that. Scoping of variables. So in general, if I have set a variable here, like $greeting, let's see, we still have that. It's there. Ed Umorior's famous again. If I close my PowerShell window out, that should go away because it was just set locally. We'll go back into PowerShell 7 and we'll see what we get. Yeah, nothing, right? Doesn't know what to do. You can set variables persistently, and I'll leave you to do this yourself. But if you look at, let's say I was looking for a command and I was like, well, what could I do with variables? Here are some options. I can get it. I can make a new one. I can set it. You can play with get help and look at set variable, but this is where you could say, locally, I'm always going to have a variable that refers to X, and I could set that variable. And you can use it to set it to a specified amount, change it. It will also create it if it doesn't exist. And if you get more into the details, this is where we talk about the persistency of it. If you add the property global variable to something, then if I say I made this, what did I miss there? I'll have to go back to that, maybe revise my material just a little bit. But with global variables, I could set a global variable in this window. I could open a new PowerShell window, and it would be the same variable. It would transition across. And if I use set variable to create it that way, then it would be persistent always to any user on the machine as well. We'll see a little bit more of that in scripting as well. So things to think about as we end variables and data types, right? How could I append? How could I set a variable? Thanks, RPG. And then in quick summary, right? PowerShell does support most of the common variable types. Arrays are accessed via indices just like any other language. And the ability to set scope will determine where that variable is accessible. So when you're looking at like inside of a loop, you've defined a variable, but it's not accessible outside, things like that. You have to declare them globally, just like any other scripting or coding language. All right, let's talk a little bit about scripting. So PowerShell did come with an ISE called the Interactive Scripting Editor. This works only for Windows PowerShell now. It doesn't work for any of the new PowerShell 7. This is one way that you can use. So I can write my script over here on the right, and I could say, git command. I'll just save this here, and that is one tool that you can use where I can chain together a bunch of commands over here, and it's going to run them all in series when I do click run. What I prefer to use, and what I highly suggest everyone here goes and takes a look at, is Visual Studio Code. And let's go ahead and get that going here, and we'll kind of set up the basics with the PowerShell extension, and then we'll dive in. While I'm doing this, you can follow along on the screen. It's pretty straightforward. code.visualstudio.com, download, and you can just click the default Windows downloader or for your operating system of choice and open and run. While I'm doing that, though, if there's any questions, anybody following along or has more questions about the applicability of some of these items that we've been going through, please throw them in the chat. Love interacting with the audience here. Okay, and as we look at options, right, location, 400 megabytes of disk space, name, I can add open with code actions to your context menus. So this is where, like, if I'm looking at a file right on my desktop and I right click, these items that show up here, I can add open with code as an item here as well. So if you're doing a lot of this, you could. You can register it as an editor, and you can add it to your path, which you definitely do want to do. For the most case, the defaults will be acceptable here. Jordan asks, if you disable PowerShell from the group policy object, it may still be able to run on the ISE. You are correct. You do need to disable both. Now, as long as users don't have administrator access, right, you might want to give them access to PowerShell for some basic networking troubleshooting that you might ask somebody to use, like if you're manning a help desk. Like, we would have people open a local PowerShell window and run some commands that we would give them that were safe enough to just run locally. But that's a risk decision that your organization and you would have to make as to how much you disable. Windows PowerShell is more and more going away. More of the modules that are being added are not being added to backfit to Windows PowerShell. So that's also something to keep in mind. And PowerShell 7 does not come installed by default yet. Windows 11 is going to start doing that, I think, in their next major release. And then there'll be another group policy object that you'll have to disable for that as well. So now that we've downloaded Visual Studio Code, we have it open. We can kind of just close out of the defaults here. And I'm just going to click New to create a new file over here in the Explorer. And it's going to ask us to connect to a folder. I'll just go to our Documents folder today. And now on the left, I see a question, do I trust who's writing code here? I'll say yes. And we still have this welcome pane. We'll go ahead and close that out. And I see I have that untitled .ps1 file that I had been creating in the Windows ISE. And it's already recognized that, hey, this is a PowerShell file. Do you really want to install that PowerShell extension to help with telling you when you've got errors? Yeah, I'll go ahead and do that as well. As soon as I click install, it pops over to the store. And now it says, hey, there are some multiple versions of PowerShell. By the way, PowerShell 7's a thing. It's the latest version, multiple operating systems. It's open source. Do you want to use that? Well, we've already installed it. So now at the bottom, we get a terminal window and we get a command line up at the top. So from the top, if I click the run button, down in my bottom, I see that I have the terminal window here. So this is where we can really start writing scripts that would do things. One thing that I do talk about in the course is exception policies, or sorry, execution policies. So let's go back over to our terminal and let's discuss that a little bit. So this is like, do I want to run PowerShell scripts that other people have written that I'm downloading off the internet? Do I want to give that permission, yes or no? There's a few different options. Right now, our policy is set to remote signed, and let's dive into what that means. Okay, so display the execution policies for each scope. You can list them. If you run it with no parameters, it'll tell you what they are. And for more information, see about execution policies. So let's look at that. This will be really important from a system administration perspective as to what, if you have people that are going to be doing development on your machines, what are you going to give them access to actually be able to do here? So there's a whole help file here on execution policies and how you can set them. But basically, get back up to the top here. So if it's all signed, it requires that every script be signed by a trusted publisher, including anything you write locally. And it'll prompt you if it's hasn't been classified. If I have it on bypass, this is where maybe I have a script that's a part of a larger tool that I've written, and that tool is going to call it. This is where there's no blocks on it. Default, we'll define what your default is. Remote signed is what our default is. And this is where, hey, if it's remote, it has to be, like I downloaded it remotely, it has to be signed. But if I'm creating scripts locally, I'm safe to run those. And then restricted, this is where you can allow only the command line, but no scripts, no .ps1 files, things like that. And then unrestricted, this means you can basically just run anything. This is a setting you don't really want to play with too much. If you're working with a large domain where you're going to have users that could be downloading things like this and you want them to not run them, leave it at remote signed or restrict them out if you really don't want them touching things. If you read through this, you can also find how to set this execution policy via GPO. So Jordan, that might be useful for your use case as well. Okay, so now that we're talking about a little bit more in-depth kind of scripting, some things to keep in mind here. If you do a hashtag or a £, that's a comment that won't execute. If you want to do a multi-line comment, I have that in the course as well, but that would be, and you can see how it already kind of did this completion for me. This would be a multi-line comment. Same thing, won't execute. If you're writing scripts, especially like if you're helping out a smaller SOC team, like you're writing an automation for them or something, I can't specify enough, document your code. Always document what is this section trying to do. In this case, I'm going to get all the processes, and then I'm going to filter it to this, and then I'm going to run this and display this output. Great. Always add that stuff in as best practices. You can also write out to the host, write host, and this is a great form of trying to debug what my code might be doing. So in this case, if I run it, I only get that write host output. But build these things in chunks. Yeah, commenting also helps you when you eventually forget why you wrote something. Absolutely. There are so many times where I'll open a script from like 2 years ago that I wrote for a help desk. I'm like, wait a second, what was this again? Like, what did I do? You know, without proper documentation of that, you're going to be starting over, or maybe you can kind of piece it through. But if you're building a script to do something, just like the pipeline in PowerShell, just be thinking about taking it in bite-sized chunks. Okay, you know, maybe I want to list in a CSV file all of the running processes on a computer that are sorted by memory from highest to lowest. Okay, break that down. Well, first I have to get all the running processes. So let's make a little code that'll do that. Then I have to sort them. Okay, now let's make the little snippet that'll do that and write comments. And then now we have to figure out how to make this output work. So that's kind of all talked about here in the basics. You can, you can just take this piece by piece and chain commands together. So in this case, you know, I'm gonna write out get process, and you know, it'll try and help you with filling these things in. It'll tell you what parameters are needed, and you can just start playing around in Visual Studio. This is where I'll spend the majority of my time, as opposed to that command line. Command line's great for short and simple things, but really the scripting editor is where you get the most money for what you're doing here. So a couple of things to keep in mind as you start to foray into the scripting side of things. PowerShell scripts are .ps1 extension files. That's how they're recognized. You have to execute them with that right execution policy. So if you're downloading something, this is even for people where maybe you post all of your useful scripts on an internal web page for your help desk users or your SOC analysts to download and be able to use. They're going to have to set that execution policy at that point because they're downloading it from something that's outside of their machine. So they could either open it and copy paste it into Visual Studio Code and save it locally to get around that, or you need to globally change that execution policy. Always use comments. There are a couple different options for documenting output. So there's a write output command as well, and there's also a write error command. And let's see if we can explore those just a little bit. Yeah, absolutely. So that's a little bit beyond what I was going to go into here, Nuclear Guy, but you can write a specific format of comments at the top of a script, and then if you get help on that, and this is really where we talk about like writing our own PowerShell modules, then that will be displayed if you got help on that module file. Where was I at? Yeah, so write output will actually put your output to the pipeline. So if you wanted to write output to a file, you could do that as well. So you see the three different cases here. Write host is only outputting to the console. It's plain text. You can't really pipe that to anywhere else afterwards. Write output, this will put it out to the console, but you can also take that and pipe that to an object. And then write error, which is where if you're doing error handling inside of like a loop and you want something that'll show up if an error happens, you can use that, and that'll give you that nice bold red there as well. Okay, let's play around a little bit with conditionals, and then we'll jump into managing processes, working with the registry, and some of the real world kind of scenario stuff here. We've got what, Anthony, about an hour left or so?
I mean, technically till 2, but we keep going a little bit over. Looking at it now, it's 1:37.
Technically till 2, okay.
Technically 2, but we can go a little bit over. Yeah.
Yeah, so let's just see what we can get into here. Yeah, Ash, if I do get command down here around write, there's a ton of them, right? There's write information, progress. If you're doing like progress bars, like downloading something or loading something, that's what's used there. Write warning, verbose, so that's used more in the help files as well, where like if I want to see detailed information, I would use that, whereas my write output would just be the basics, stuff like that. Okay, so conditionals. So we're going to go back over here to my conditional statements and loops. So really quickly, we'll copy and paste some of these and play around with them a little bit. Fairly straightforward. You know, if we look at this first block here, so if we talk through the code, we're setting a variable called age, and in this case we set it to 18, and then we ran just if, and then the condition in parentheses. So in this case, if the age variable is greater than or equal to, that's what the -GE means, 18, then it's going to write out to the host you're an adult. So if I take that and paste that here into Visual Studio Code, awesome, pasting works great from there. And we see down here at the bottom, I'll go ahead and clear my screen to make it a little easier for people to see. You know, I can hit run here and it says, yep, you're an adult. And if I change that to say 16, run that again, it does not. Now, let's say I wanted two output options. We'll go to the if-else statements. So this is very similar, and in this case, we'll paste this next snippet in. So in this case, we're going to say, hey, my score is 75. Okay, if the score is greater than or equal to 60, you passed. If it isn't, you failed. And if I run that, I get that you passed. And if I change the score here to less than, I get that you failed. And if I wanted to really make this, you know, fire for effect, I could throw that as write error. And now I get the big, bold red, you failed. Things to keep in mind here, right? My condition goes in parentheses. My output for the if and then for the else goes in their own sets of brackets. Pretty straightforward, pretty in line with other scripting languages. Now, what if I wanted to have multiple conditions? Well, that's where we get into the else if statements. So we'll play with a little bit of weather here with those. And let's talk through what that code does. So I set a variable again. This is temperature set to 35. And I say, hey, if we're greater than 30, this must be Celsius, it's hot outside. If it's greater than 20, it's nice. And if it's below that, you know, it's not greater than or equal to those, then it's cold outside. So what happens when I run this? I get the it's hot outside. So it will execute on the first condition it meets. That's the thing to keep in mind here. So we got to the if greater than or equal to 30, it printed it's hot outside. Even though temperature is greater than 20, it did not write that second command output. Cybercotta asks, can I create an if-else-if loop to search for created admin accounts or aliases? Yeah, so let's explore that a little bit. So I don't even need a loop to search for created accounts, but I might want a loop to discuss what I would do with them. Right, so I could find, let's see what we can find here. This is the great stuff because I love to hear about the use cases from the class here in the audience. So I just ran get command on finding anything around users. So in this case, because I'm on a fresh virtual machine, let's play and see what we can find. So if I get local user, okay, I have 4 accounts here. And we want to see created admin accounts or aliases. So if I do get local user, what are the properties we can look at there? And this is where you start to explore with the help files and things like that. You know, so maybe you have a use case where you want to see like accounts that aren't expired. or accounts that haven't had their passwords reset, like maybe somebody has circumvented your password policy. Those could be use cases here. Trying to see where I would find permissions on this. Let's go get local user, or get help on get local user, and we'll go detailed. But in short, to answer your question, yes, absolutely. You know, maybe I want to get all my users and then look at a specific property of them and store that in a variable, and then use the if statements to take action based on those. You know, if password expires within the next 30 days, write this output. Else, if password expires in 15 days or less, write this different output, and things like that. So I can find an account by name. I can find an account connected to Microsoft. I can find an account with an SID. Yeah, this would definitely be worth exploring more, but you could definitely do stuff like that with your conditionals here. Going back over to the course, switch statements, if you're not familiar with those, it's another way of writing these kind of conditionals. Right, so I set the day to Monday, and then I basically have these different doors that it could go through. Default is the one that it'll go through if it doesn't meet the rest. For any of my network administrators in the group, this is like your firewall rules. It'll pass on the first match, and then that bottom is your catch-all. Loops. So let's take a look at what a loop in PowerShell looks like. Okay, so let's break this down. So for, I set a variable that's equal to 1. And as long as that variable is less than or equal to 5, it'll keep doing what's in the brackets. And then at the end of the loop, in this case, it increments that variable by 1. So if I run this, let's clear my screen again. I get iteration with the variable, and it ran 1 to 5 because we started at 1, and we said as long as it's less than or equal to 5, it'll keep doing it. So what actually happens behind the scenes is at the end of the iteration where it displays 5, it increments it by 1. So now $i is equal to 6, and then it tries the loop again and nothing happens. And so it ends. We also have for each. So for each loops, we already saw those, but that is where I say for each of these variables that are in like an array. So here's an example as well that would iterate through and display red, green, blue with the color naming from it. So for every color that's in them. So in older programming scripting languages, you had to get the index of the array, find out how many individual items there were in the array, and then you had to create a for loop with those numbers, like we did in the previous example. Now we have this for each, which will look at those numerical values of array counts and increment them and solve that all for you. Makes it a little nicer and easier. While loops just keep operating while that thing is true. So we set count equal to 1. As long as it's less than or equal to 5, it'll keep doing it. And then inside of the doing it is where we actually increment it. Just another way to accomplish similar tasks. We get the same output as that original for loop. And then finally, and we're going to jump to some real world SOC examples here. I do want to cover the do while loop. So this is where we are going to execute this loop at least once, no matter what. So we set count equal to 1, and then we're saying, hey, do the thing, write it out, and then at the end we throw the while, and that's where it'll check the condition. So it's going to do the loop the first time, then it'll check the condition to repeat it. And again, we're going to see similar things here. We get the 1 to 5. Okay, let's get into some real world examples. Let's talk about some security practices, and let's wrap up, and we'll leave with plenty more for everybody to dive in and explore on their own. So I'm going to jump down to Module 9, which is managing processes, services, and system information. And we just have some real world kind of examples here. We talked through getting process, stopping processes. We talked through getting and stopping services as well. So get process, you can get it by name. You can stop with a dash force, might be required in some cases if it's a self-generating process that wants to restart. Under managing system services, same thing with services as well, right? Here's that print spooler, your typical IT troubleshooting. I can't print. Here's some cool stuff around the individual computers, right? So WMI, Windows Management Instrumentation, and CIM Instance. Those are both connectors that allow you to interface with the actual computer. So let me go ahead and show what some of those look like here. We'll go back to our good old command line, and we're going to go get CIM Instance, and we'll see what we can find out about our operating system here. Okay, so in this case, we got a serial number, we got where this VM was created, we got some versions of this operating system. What else can we play with here? Well, let's see what else is available in this. Let's see what else is available in this. Sorry, losing my train of thought while I type. Hard to do two things at once sometimes. Let's see what's available as properties to this commandlet. So if I pass this to get member, it actually took a little bit because we can see a ton of stuff. Voltage caps, versions, system names, status, socket designations, processor IDs, number of cores, CPU status, tons of stuff in here as well. So if I wanted to look at things like CPU usage or memory usage on an entire machine, we could play with get CIM instance 132 processor, and then we could select out. And if you dive into the detailed help on this, you'll get a lot more as to what this actually means. So actually my CPU usage is nice and low right now. I could also look at, what's my free physical memory. Some of this isn't going to play quite right on a virtual machine, but you'll see the use case, yeah. So it didn't want to show me anything because I'm on a VM. Another property you can play with here is your total memory, and we'll see if that, yeah, it's not going to give me anything. Disk usage. So everything is a drive in PowerShell, including your registry. So PS drive, and if I want to look at the provider of the file system, here are my two drives that are mounted. They're both mapped the same, just temp is mapped here. That's a quick way to get to the temp drive. If I just do temp, I'm actually mounted into users, administrator, app data, local, whatever that goes down to. But you can get drive information here as well. So, some things that you might want to do in a script. Let me paste this whole thing into Visual Studio Code, and we'll talk through it. This will be a good use case to kind of wrap up on a little bit. This is going to retrieve all my running processes. It's going to identify any of them that I think are suspicious. It'll export that list, and then it'll check if those any critical services like Windows Defender are online. So let's walk through this. So I started with defining what I think are suspicious processes. So from your own knowledge, from your own intelligence of what threat actors might run on a machine, you can define an array, and these are names that would show up in get process. And so I've had, Mimikatz, PowerShell. Maybe you don't want users running command, just your command prompt, or even netcat. We also have a running process variable that we're going to break down where I get processes here. And then I filter them out and select out their name, their ID, and the memory usage. That's what WS is. Sorry, I'd have to dive into the help on that a little bit more. But think of if you think of like your CompTIA A+ computer architecture, there are a few different bus line voltages that are built in. So you have a plus 5 volt DC rail, and I think a plus or minus 12. Some newer generation CPUs, their power supply units break it out into plus or minus 24 volt. And so I believe that voltage cap variable will help you determine if you're doing some like hardware troubleshooting, any of those that are dipping below what their supposed line voltage is supposed to be. But I'd have to dive a little bit more into the help to answer that question a little bit more. But let's go back to this here in Visual Studio Code. So this second variable, I am running this command to get all my processes and select these properties to store. So this variable will be, that output. Then I'm going to say, let's generate a list of anything that's suspect that is in that running processes group where the object names are also in the suspicious processes. And then if they are in that new list we've created, we're going to write that out to the host. I like error because it gives you that nice bold feeling. It really wakes you up in the morning. And we're going to format it into a table, and we'll size that out based on how many processes are there. And then export the process list. So I can now take that running process list and I can put that in a CSV. The export command is great for different formats that you might want to run. So down here in my terminal, if I get command around export, you can see, where'd we go? Export CSV is one. You have a general one where you can determine the formatting. You have export as XML. And there's also, I believe, format as well as an output one to play with, which we didn't really get a chance to play around with too much here. But formatting into a table, a list, wide format. So like if you're getting a list of files like get child item, you can format that wide so you can see that as well. Quick example there. Let's go to a directory where I have a good amount of files. Yeah, so that kind of went off the screen, right? So if I do get child item format wide, now I get that in that 2-column format, things like that. Coming back over to the script, so we're also going to check and see if any of those critical services are running. So we defined the critical services as the event log runner, our time sync, and Windows Defender. And if they're not running, we'll drop a warning out here with a big bold foreground color of red. So let's see what happens if we run this out. So we got an error because I don't have a SOC directory created. So let's adjust that. So, whoop. Okay, now I have that directory made. Try that one more time. Okay, so we got process data was exported. We got no errors, so it didn't detect those running services, which I find interesting because we are running PowerShell behind the scenes. Let's try and pop up command. Now I've got a command line running as well, and we'll run that one more time. Still didn't come up. Okay. But then it did export to running processes.csv. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So I do have a comma separated values file. I'll allow it to be opened. and we can see those running processes by name, ID, and by memory. So, maybe you have a scheduled task that runs every day that outputs to a dashboard that'll pop these errors if there are, Windows Defenders not running as an alert, or if you do detect any of those malicious services, things like that. A little bit further deeper in the class, and I've left people that have access, plenty of stuff to work on too. We do have a capstone that I'd love for everyone to try out. You can always hit me up on LinkedIn, give me your feedback, or give the feedback to the wonderful folks here at Level Effect. We do answer it as well, but please try and go through and work through it on your own. But specifically, this is a task where you've been asked to create a script that collects security event logs, identifies those threats, generates a report, and you could even provide an automated response. So, things to look at like failed logins or failed process executions, displaying those out, writing those hosts out, defining some suspicious commands. So we give some lists here and some of the answers for commands and processes, getting your execution logs, and then displaying any of those alerts, exporting that to a CSV. We kind of walked through a little bit. And then if you want to try automating things off this is basics of how a SOAR would function. Security orchestration, automated response tooling. Right now I've gotten a list of these malicious processes, and maybe I want to terminate them and generate a report that I terminated them on any of these workstations. There's also some other real world scenarios. So investigating credential dumping. That's where you're looking for processes that are matching Mimikatz or LSAS. Detecting any lateral movement by anybody running remote PowerShell. Registry modifications, because you can interact with that just like the file system. And then ransomware. So in this case, we're looking for files that have been modified very recently, especially like if every file in a user's documents folder has been modified in the last hour, all of them, and they have the same timestamp, something is doing that. It's probably not the user. And detecting high CPU or disk usage by processes. Some of these background poorly written malware tools will eat up a lot of CPU, do things like that. So finally, really enjoy coming out and talking to everyone today. Hopefully this gave you enough of the basics of getting into PowerShell so that you feel comfortable working from the command line. You feel comfortable installing Visual Studio Code and playing around with a little bit of scripting. There's a ton more that's not covered here. If you're interested in how you could use PowerShell to make tools, there's a book called PowerShell Tool Making. It's part of the Month of Lunches series, which I'm a big fan of those books, because they give you a project to do every day, and they're ideally done in an hour. So in theory, I know how busy we all are, but in theory, if you could sit down for your lunch break and crack open that book, you could do a chapter a day, and you could get through it in an entire month. Great book. It's one I use to learn, and they keep releasing new versions, and I keep still going through it. As I start to wrap, if you have any last questions that I can answer, please throw them in the chat. But if not, I'll just kind of go through my summary here. We talked about installing PowerShell, installing Visual Studio Code, the basics at that command line, working with those directories and files. Got a little bit into scripting and showed some of the basics here, like conditionals, loops. We didn't get into error handling. There is a module in a lab just for error handling that you can talk through, where you can break out of a loop if it's continuously running or if you generated some failure there. And then we talked through just a little touch on working with the Windows registry, managing processes and services, and then some security best practices. Talk about those execution policies that you can set via GPO. We do have another lab on Active Directory security. So this is where you can look at if you can tie into Active Directory, how to start retrieving users out of the Active Directory group. This is where Cyberkata, you were asking about admins, right? If typically in Active Directory, admins are in a specific group. So this is where you can use like the identity switch to get those members of a group and look at things like that for your own scripting. Privileged accounts, things like that, right? Finding users with passwords that don't expire. Some things we talked about. I had a dashboard, real world use case, where I was looking at every day there would pop up a list of any users that had been locked out, or any accounts that had been created off hours, because we were the group that created all user accounts. So if something else popped up, we would know about it and we could lock that down and figure that out. So again, thank you so much to everybody for having me on today. For the Level Effect team, I think this SOC 100 course over the last period that we've been running this has been fantastic. Really putting a lot of useful information out there. So please check out the other streams, the other instructors, and please give us all your feedback. For my walkthrough of PowerShell, I want that to be more inclusive of more use cases. Love interacting with the chat. And so if there's anything that I can do better, please give us that feedback, and we'll continue to iterate and improve. With that, I'll throw it back to our Level Effect folks. And again, thank you so much for having me on today.
Well, Tom, thank you very much. I think this was probably, I mean, I wish I had this introduction to PowerShell when I first started, and getting myself acquainted with everything would have just made my life so much easier. So I can tell you put a ton of work into this to make it not only digestible, but relatable to students. Answering questions on the fly as well, too, just like that, I think was really appreciated by the students in chat, and I'm sure those that are watching the recording as well, too. So thank you very much for putting this together. This is a lot of really good, concise work, but understandable, and also something that students can run with and start being actionable with right away. So really, really awesome. Capstone looks like a really fun project as well, too, to start applying everything that we've learned here to date. So I think definitely from us over here and the chat as well, really appreciate you coming on stream, man, and walking through everything and supporting these students and being part of the SOC 100 initiative that we've been having over here. So thanks for spending your Saturday over here with us, Tom.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. And I'm going to drop my LinkedIn in the chat as well.
Yeah,
Anybody
please do.
Here, feel free to connect. Any of you that are looking also to get into cybersecurity, please reach out. I am a hiring manager over at DigiCert. We are growing our team, so periodically I am hiring SOC analysts and engineers. So please, stay in touch that way as well.
Tom, go ahead and drop that link again, because so I just threw you a VIP so you can actually drop links. I normally have them all disabled until people start dropping them, so go ahead and drop your socials once more.
It looked like it popped.
Yeah, it just shows like a triple asterisk.
Oh, does it? Well, now it says I have to wait 30 seconds, so give me
you got timed out automatically. Nice.
There we go. Well, it says it's a duplicate, so
yeah.
There we go.
There you go. Yeah, perfect. Went through. Nice. Thanks, Tom.
All right.
So Nuclear Guy, the video should be up, I believe, on Monday. So we'll have the recording up over there. We're going to tag Tom and let everyone know as well, too, in Discord, everything's up and running. So you can check it out then, and go and hop in the SOC 100-5 course. You can go through it on your own as well, too. Kind of really take it in. There's a lot of extra pieces inside there that you could take away. So with that being said, thank you again, everyone, for spending another Saturday over here with us over at Level Effect, going through this course series, taking time out of your weekend and out of your day to learn and engage with one another, ask good questions. It really helps us go and deliver more content that is more relatable to you as we deliver it live. So thank you again. Thank you, Tom. And if anyone else has further questions, please go ahead, and we're going to see you inside of Discord. And if we don't see some more questions, we'll see you next week. We got some more content coming up. We're going to be jumping into cloud security and AppSec to some degree, and also a little bit of a surprise stream coming up next Friday as well, too. So thank you again, everyone. Thank you, Tom. Have yourselves a good rest of your weekend and a good week. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, everyone.